stunning looks than swift.
On the 18th of June 1983, with India's World Cup hopes on the line, Kapil Dev walked out to bat against Zimbabwe with the score reading 17 for 5. He then scored 175 not out, and for 40 years that knock has been the standard bearer for the greatest one-man shows you'll see, especially in the history of the World Cup. That, 40 years later, changes, because around the 20th over mark tonight at the Wankhede, Australia, while their World Cup wasn't quite on the line, were 90 for 7 against Afghanistan, standing in the face of what would have been their first ever defeat to Afghanistan. But then enter Glenn Maxwell. It was a Mumbai night of mayhem, a Mumbai night of magic, a night on which Glenn Maxwell did something which is beyond the thinkable. He has single-handedly, with a 200 not out, taken Australia to victory from a place where they had no chance in the game, and that gives us a lot to talk about. Welcome to Maruti Suzuki Arena, presents ESPN Cricket for Matchday, powered by Qatar Airways. Steve Harmison in the studio, Urooj, Mumtaz with us on link. I struggled my way through that opening. Do you guys have any words to...
No, words, superlatives can't do justice what Glenn Maxwell has just done. You know, we were nearly sitting in this chair from a 25th over expecting the game to finish. You know, and if Afghanistan had took their catches, it might have been. But I tell you what, that's up there. I didn't think I'd witness anything as good, as powerful, as grit, determination. You know, when you're playing for your country, what I witnessed when Ben Stokes did what he did at Headingley. But I tell you what, that's right up there. That is up there, if not gone beyond it, because he walks out to bat on hat-trick ball. You know, DRS straight after the first ball. Pressure of all the Afghanistan players in and around him. And to bat on one leg for the probably, the 2/3 of that innings. Hats off. That's just remarkable innings. And that will I don't think in 50 over World Cup cricket history, that innings will never ever be beaten.
Urooj?
Well, superhuman, right? You don't expect in all human capacity for something like that to go down. It is just phenomenal, unbelievable, and you can't put into words, because it is something which is probably not meant for the normal human being, because that looked like he was batting on a different level, on a different planet. And I completely agree with Steve. I don't think that we will ever see something as phenomenally remarkable as that ever again in one-day history, given the circumstances that Glenn Maxwell did it in. To almost have the physical limitation that he had for majority of the innings, and to single-handedly put up 201 from a team that was 90-odd for 7, it is a superhuman effort. Again, you can put all the adjectives to describe Glenn Maxwell, but I think you can only applaud it. You can tip the hat over to him for years to come.
Yeah, words are hard to find for the kind of knock we've seen. I know the word greatest of all time gets thrown around quite a lot, but this tonight from Glenn Maxwell is one that surely, as Steve and Urooj pointed out, will rank right up there whenever anyone looks back at the history of this game we love. Let's take you through the scorecard before we start dissecting that once-in-a-lifetime effort. Afghanistan, they chose to bat first at Wankhede. They put on a total 291 for 5. Spare a thought for Ibrahim Zadran, who batted through the innings in the Mumbai heat, made an unbeaten century to take Afghanistan to 291, which had its contribution from Rashid Khan to the last 6 overs, went for 75, and we felt Afghanistan might have a kind of score that will challenge Australia. 20 overs in, we thought Afghanistan had way more than a score they needed to challenge Australia, because Australia lost their 7th wicket for 91. That's when Mitchell Starc departed, and Glenn Maxwell was joined by his captain Pat Cummins. And Pat Cummins' name doesn't feature because we only put the 2 highest scores, but that will be among the most celebrated 12 not outs you will ever see. I brought up the Kapil Dev comparison. You can't have that Kapil Dev 175 without the Kirmani effort to go, Urooj. And Pat Cummins is 12 not out of 68. Surely ranks right up there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a different story to do it when you have to string a partnership and you still have mid-order batters to do, and you almost feel like, fine, fair enough, there will be some scoring on the other side. But to again have a physical limitation where he literally couldn't use his feet. But it was very important for Pat Cummins to bat out 100 plus minutes, 68 deliveries, because it really didn't matter what he scored. He needed to be out there. And Afghanistan got a phenomenal quality bowling attack. Obviously, they failed to break that 200 plus run partnership. But yes, it's one of those that will probably get mentioned maybe sometimes because of what extraordinary achievement and feat Glenn Maxwell has put up. But had Cummins not been out there, it could have been a different story.
I guess the parallel to go with your comparison is the Jack Leach.
Jack Leach, the greatest ever one. Yeah, Ben's was over a period of time. That innings, and that I didn't think that could get beaten for thrill, for the way the sort of every ounce of the individual had to exhume out of his own body to make sure that he was there at the end to see his team over the line. And that's what Glenn Maxwell. We could sit here and go, do you know what? They dropped 4 catches. We can sit here and we can pick little bits and pieces out of what happened with Afghanistan, but we shouldn't, because that would take something away from what Glenn Maxwell did. Well, 75% of that game, Afghanistan had it perfect in their own hands, and it came down to absolute brilliance. So we can look at what Afghanistan did wrong, but I think that would be unfair on Glenn Maxwell for what he did right. His team were dead and buried; they were gone, and he made sure that there was still life in Australia when it came to being into the semi-final. And wow, it's still them sixes he was hitting when he was standing on one leg, the reverse sort of switch hits that he was hitting over the third boundary and then over the point boundary when he literally could hardly stand up. No matter what Afghanistan did, that's just phenomenal from I think one of the most naturally talented players in the game. He got 100. It's amazing. You look back at you're going to look back. You said it earlier. You're going to look back at his World Cup, and he had a 44-ball 100, and that wasn't the best innings he had in the tournament. It's a freak of nature, this guy, and when he's on, wow, you just can't believe what you've just witnessed.
Yeah. Important to point out what Steve mentions, that there were 3 lives and they came in the space of 10 balls. There was one dropped effort which came because Hashmatullah Shahidi thought Rashid Khan might be going for the catch. Soon after, he was given LBW and had almost started walking once he saw that the ball had pitched, but then height saved him on that one, and then came the easier of the chances, Mujib spilling a straightforward one at short fine. But as Steve points out, Urooj, if you've hit the fastest 100 in World Cup history a week earlier, and then that's not even close to your best knock off that week, it says something. I mean, everything about this knock is worth bringing superlatives out for, but the physical toil of it, to be delivering those shots while he was cramping as bad, is that what is the greatest part of the knock?
Yeah, absolutely. It's unmatched individual brilliance, the spectacle he put up, because you look at those hits that he hit, the 4s and the 6s, on practically no feet, were all proper timed middle of the bat shots. He picked his gap, he knew where his slots were. Even the reverse of Omar Zai, when he got in, he didn't spare Mujib, he didn't spare Noor, he didn't spare Nabi. So as many things as Afghanistan tried, his brilliance, his hand-eye coordination to generate that much strength, just probably off core, but basically through your hands, that's what it is, because you expect some of them to get top head, you expect some of them to land in the middle, some of them not to be clean hits. What makes this so magical is the fact that all of them were clean hits and exactly where he intended to go, which makes it that much more. You can't process it. Like even right now, I think most of the cricketing world will probably not be able to process what they've just seen because literally it is unmatched brilliance.
I'm going to ask again. Ranks right up there among the greatest knocks. These are tougher to call.
No, it is. It's always when it happens, when it just happens, this is the greatest, this is the greatest. You know, when somebody retires, he was the greatest. And it gets used far too much. But when somebody's got 201 out of 292 in a game where your team was 90 for 7, that has to be the greatest. You know, double hundreds in 50 over cricket in itself are very, very rare. But I think put the whole thing into the mix, it has to be the greatest innings in ODI cricket that there's ever been, because just for the numbers itself, the game situation, where it was at, and then if you were at the game and you're watching it, because in 10, 15, 20 years' time or 40 years' time, you talk about Capel's feat and his knock, you just see numbers. So in 10 years' time, you're going to see 292 for 7, or 46.5 overs, and Maxwell's got 201. Unless you watched it, you realise how great it was. For me, numbers will be one thing, but actually, I think the pictures that we've just witnessed, I think that tells a million stories. Pat Cummins at the other end, you know, the way the whole sort of theatre of the DRS, the drop catch, you know, Afghanistan, the way their body language just completely dive bombed. For me, it was like a boxing match where Afghanistan was a heavyweight, had thrown 11 rounds of unbelievable punches against somebody who just takes it on the chin. But in that last round, when they needed to throw a one-killer punch, they had nothing left. I think Afghanistan thought they had done it when they were 5 down. And unfortunately, the last 20 overs, I don't think Afghanistan had a lot left to give. But Glenn Maxwell had just enough to give to get his team over the line. Magical.
Magical, indeed. It almost feels like you can't talk enough, but I think that has been perfectly summarized by Steve Harmison and by Urooj. So that's that on Glenn Maxwell. If you haven't, as Steve points out, if you haven't seen it, once you're done watching this, of course, make sure you catch the highlights, because this is not a knock you can't not have seen. But now we need to look at the other side, and Steve, now I ask you to put on your bowling hat. When Afghanistan were bowling, especially in that second part of the innings when Maxwell was struggling with his injury, what could they have done differently?
I think they thought they had done it. I honestly think I think Afghanistan thought that was it was game over, we've won the game. We get Pat Cummins out, Glenn Maxwell will slog a few, he'll chip one up in the air, and he'll get out. But slowly but surely you could see the panic in the body language of Afghanistan. They started not to think calmly, which is something they've thought calmly throughout this whole game, up until probably the 30th over. And that was, I think that was evident to see when Maxwell kept going down. Jonathan Trott was on the side having a go at the umpires. You could see the in-house fighting between Rashid Khan and one or two others. They start to get, and then they bring them all into a huddle. The bowlers, if they just stayed a little bit calmer, they possibly could have had a different outcome. Held their catches, that would have been another thing. They bowled, I think, a lot of balls in the right area for Glenn Maxwell to score when he was injured. And I think that is something we spoke about it. We spoke about 10 overs to go upstairs when we're talking. We're saying, well, what would you have done? Go wide Yorkers. Make sure he couldn't reach the ball. Bear in mind, if you can bowl wide Yorkers, don't mind if you bowl ear wide if he can't reach it, but as long as you're in and around that line, it makes him doubly harder to score 360. He can only score in one area. He was in real trouble in and around that sort of 40 over period, and I don't think there was any calm thinking out there, because I think Afghanistan really they were knackered. They were really tired mentally and physically. I think they were shot because of the emotion they had got themselves in when Australia were 90 for 7.
Yeah, and when you look back at the game and you think about that first 10 over burst from Afghanistan, you will feel all the more for the way it ended for them. But Urooj, there was an interesting bit I heard on commentary. It was around that 10th over mark. They had taken 4 wickets, and we saw an abundance of intensity, not just in terms of how they bowled, but also how charged they were on the field. And I caught Matthew Hayden on comms talking about how Afghanistan might risk tiring themselves out. That level of intensity might be unsustainable for the course of an entire ODI innings. Do you feel that happened at some level?
It's almost but natural, sort of almost ride that wave of elation and sort of euphoria that comes when you've got a team by the scruff of the neck. I mean, you wouldn't fathom the opposition 69 for 5, 91 for 7 to do what Glenn Maxwell single-handedly did. But that probably is one place where Afghanistan will learn with time, considering they don't play quality oppositions, tight quality match ends, or with bigger or better ranked sides, or against better quality players. So it is something that probably showed a little bit in terms of immaturity as a team coming through the ranks. Take nothing away from Afghanistan's sort of ride in this World Cup, and they've had some really good wins. Even today, they had pretty much the whole game until sort of Glenn Maxwell did what Glenn Maxwell did. So I think that somewhere you could debate a few bowling changes where I think they bowled 17 or 19 overs on a trot for their spinners against someone who plays spin exceptionally well, Glenn Maxwell. Their seamers were obviously effective. Maybe they could have brought 2 over burst from the seamers earlier in the piece. And also, again, I agree with Steve, the lines that he bowled, I mean, you wanted to make Glenn Maxwell reach for the ball and have his cramps or hamstring or whatever's pulling, put that at test. So whether it was even the slower bouncers into the surface or sort of making him knock off his feet and try and hit over his head, or it was outside off stump. You didn't see any of the bowlers. It was, in fact, both the seam bowlers bowled from over the wicket into the angle, into the right-hander Maxwell, into his zone onto the leg side, and that's where he hit maximum number of boundaries. So maybe a little bit of overawed by the occasion, and they almost seemed shell-shocked. You could see that on their faces, that they were just at the mercy and just hoping for Glenn Maxwell to make a mistake rather than picking up a wicket. And it's easier said than done when you come against the onslaught of an individual who is in the form of the game. It's sometimes very hard to stop, and it's easier said than done.
Now, if we go back to the call on the 11, and I say this fully acknowledging my gratitude to hindsight, the amount the ball was doing for the seamers, could they have felt that maybe a Fazal Hook, if we did have a Fazal Farooqi playing and had 3 seamers, it might have been different?
You can say that, yeah, but I look at it and think in 90 for 7, the right team was picked. At 90 for 7, Afghanistan were going to win, and at 90 for 7, I think that's when the problem started for Afghanistan, in a position where, like we've been talking about, I think Afghanistan thought, if we bowl straight at Glenn Maxwell, who is on one leg and struggling, he will hit one up in the air eventually. His body will not withstand the length of time to get to 292 to win the game. He will hit one up in the air. And I think Afghanistan were waiting for it to happen. Yep. Unfortunately for them, by the time they got their heads around the fact that he was in a position where he could win the game, and Pat Cummins was getting harder and harder to dismiss, then I don't think it really mattered if he had another seamer or even Rashid Khan came onto bowl, their premier spinner. I think the chance was missed by Afghanistan in that period. So hindsight's a wonderful thing. Yes, they could have had another seamer, but I think all in all, I think at 91 for 7, the right team was picked. Just unfortunately, they fell at the final hurdle.
Not wanting to single out any bowler, especially given the kind of effort we saw from Maxwell, but Urooj, Mujibur Rahman on the day, going for 72 in 8.5 overs, and it's in continuation with the kind of tournament. I think it's 7 wickets for him so far, and he has now been around for a while. While, you know, the argument for a Noor might be that, okay, when he's in the face of an onslaught of someone like Maxwell, might not have that amount of experience to go back to, but that's not the case with Mujib. Do you feel he was, why do you think he was lacking somewhere?
Yeah, I think obviously he sets a high reputation for himself because of what he's achieved in the past. But throughout this World Cup, he just hasn't been able to hold his length. He hasn't been able to apply consistent pressure, which has been the story of this World Cup. In order to pick up wickets, all bowlers that you see topping those charts have been consistent with holding a good length, whether they're the seamers or the spinners. And just that, because also sometimes with bowlers in your team, if you are one of those bowlers which your team heavily relies on to get the breakthrough, that it becomes slightly more difficult to have that balancing act because you're almost trying which was also the case with Rashid Khan earlier in the tournament, just trying too hard to pick up a wicket as opposed to just creating pressure. And then you obviously bowl that magical delivery or the batsman makes a mistake. So I just feel that has been something that hasn't clicked for Mujib in his own bowling armory.
Right. So that does it for now. What does this result mean to the points table? Among all the other things Glenn Maxwell pulled off, he also pulled off the queue for Australia. They are through to the semi-finals, as they tend to at most of these events. And what we also know now is we have confirmation on the second semi-final. South Africa and Australia are both now guaranteed to finish either second or third, which means it will be both of them against each other in the second semi-final. Now, whether they play at Wankhede or Eden Gardens will depend on whether or not Pakistan make it as the fourth side. But as you can see just below those qualifying spots, New Zealand, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all three of them will go into their last games. New Zealand play Sri Lanka, Pakistan play England, and Afghanistan have South Africa. For Afghanistan now, it will need a lot, because not only do they need to win against South Africa, they also have to see New Zealand and Pakistan losing. And just picking yourself up, and it's a quick turnaround, they play on Friday, after this kind of a defeat, it's tough.
Yeah, that's tough. I think that's the killer blow. I don't see Afghanistan getting through now. I think that game against Africa, even if they do win it, I think New Zealand or Pakistan will win their game, and obviously they've got a better run rate, so they will go through. So I feel for Afghanistan because they've been brilliant in this tournament. 75% of this game, they had the points. They had the 10 points on the board. It was just an absolute hour of brilliance, 2 hours of brilliance from Maxwell. And unfortunately, I think Afghanistan go home before the semi-finals. It's going to be a great battle between England desperately need to win because they should beat the Netherlands, and they'll still need to beat Pakistan. And Sri Lanka have still got a bit to play for against New Zealand. I think my money's on New Zealand qualifying, because I think the way they're playing with Ravindra and Williamson now coming back into the team and in form, I think New Zealand might just pip Pakistan by on net run rate, because I think Pakistan might be England.
Tell you what, that's strong words, because you've got a Pakistan representative here, and you're also scaring a lot of Indian supporters, because now you've seen if it is India versus New Zealand, it happens at Wankhede.
Yeah.
You've seen what the ball was doing in the second innings. God, India want to be batting first in that game. At least that's what the fans will think. Urooj, on Afghanistan, they go into that game against South Africa, and let's forget qualification, just how important it is for them to pick themselves up and have that solid game out there, because nothing that has happened today or that happens on Friday should change the narrative of what has been, even given the nature of this defeat, such an extraordinary story, this World Cup for them.
Yeah, I don't think Afghanistan will have a point to prove to anybody at all going to that last game. They've obviously closed the gap in terms of the teams, the way they are ranked. In fact, this World Cup has been phenomenal that way, in terms of all teams looking contender for semi-final spots, maybe barring one or two. What Afghanistan will probably have to do is play for their own pride, play for their own 15 or 20 member squad, and just show to themselves that it was a one-off. Obviously, you look at it with a fine-tooth comb and you'll pick up points of what Afghanistan could have done differently. But I think it'll be a game that they will have to play for themselves without a point to prove. Just come out there, play a good game of cricket, and maybe finish on a high, beating South Africa, whether they qualify for the semi-final or not.
All right. We will. That is that then. Thank you, Urooj, for your company through this most riveting of games that we've had the pleasure of seeing this Tuesday. Steve, you'll be back with us, and you must be quite excited. The European Derby next.
European Derby next, yes. I'm looking forward to it. England have got to win. If England don't win there, they don't deserve to qualify for the Champions Trophy, and that possibly gives Pakistan an easier game in the last game if England don't win next. But I'm expecting two good performances from England, starting obviously from tomorrow.
Yeah, it's been nearly a month since they won, so we do hope.
Fingers crossed.
We get to see an English win with you.
Yes, it would be nice. It would be nice. It would be nice to see an English win. Now I'm here, and I got here when England were out, and unfortunately England haven't really and set the world alight since I've been here. So I'm looking forward to a W in the column.
I'm looking forward to good spirits when we meet tomorrow. Thank you so much, Urooj, for your time. Thank you, Steve. There's so much to look back upon on this game, what the thoughts were of the players, the captains, and all the pieces that are going to come up on that marvel that we saw from Maxwell in Mumbai. The ESPN Cricinfo mobile app will have you covered with all of that. If you haven't yet, go to the Play Store or the App Store and download it right away. That does it from us then this Tuesday, where we've seen such a wonder that was Glenn Maxwell in Mumbai. Thanks for watching. That's all on Maruti Suzuki Arena presents ESPN Cricinfo Matchday, powered by Qatar Airways.
Stunning looks, then swift.